3 in the morning, I reached across the bed for my husband and found only cold, empty sheets. I grabbed my phone to check the garage camera, and what I saw froze the blood in my veins. My husband kneeling under my brand new SUV with bolt cutters. Deliberately weakening the brake line meant to kill me the next morning. My name is Vivian, and I had just inherited $250 million from a childless aunt overseas, planning to drive down the coast the next day to see my parents about investing it wisely, instead of letting it sit untouched in an account. That night I woke reaching for my husband, Marcus, and found the bed empty. So I opened what I thought was our living room camera, and instead pulled up the dashcam feed from my new car, watching in silent horror as the man I had trusted for 3 years crouched beneath it in latex gloves, calmly crushing the brake line just enough that it would fail on a steep mountain descent without looking like sabotage to anyone who did not know exactly what they were looking for. Through the camera's built-in microphone, I heard his phone ring and heard him answer on speaker, a woman's voice cooing that their baby was kicking and that my stupid wife had had enough fun, that the $250 million needed to belong to their child instead. Marcus laughed, tightening a bolt, telling her he had just cut the brake line and that once I was gone on the coastal drive tomorrow, every dollar would default to him as my legal husband, and he would move her and the baby straight into our house. I lay frozen under the covers until morning, biting my lip until it bled, ensuring not a single sob escaped, understanding that the naive wife who trusted him had died in that instant, replaced by someone with nothing left to lose. The next morning, I forced a calm smile over coffee, my hands trembling slightly around the warm mug, quietly telling Marcus I had changed my mind and wanted to take the sedan instead. Some excuse about wanting to break in the new SUV slowly before a long mountain drive. His face tightened for just a moment, a flicker of panic he quickly buried. And before I could say another word, his spoiled younger sister Betrayal burst through the front door with her boyfriend Dax, demanding to borrow the SUV for a weekend trip since her own car was in the shop. I tried to steer her toward the sedan instead, gently offering it as a perfectly good alternative, but Marcus cut in immediately, insisting loudly that the SUV was perfectly safe and freshly serviced, practically shoving the keys into Brielle's hand himself, while their mother Diane praised him for being so generous with his sister. I stood frozen at the kitchen island, watching my own husband personally hand his sister the exact keys meant to end my life, too stunned to stop him without exposing everything I already knew. The hours that followed were unbearable, Marcus pacing and sweating despite the air conditioning, terrified not for his sister's safety, but for his perfect plan unraveling. When his phone finally rang from an unknown number, I watched every trace of color drain from his face as he learned the SUV had gone off a mountain pass in flames, killing both occupants instantly, and he collapsed onto the rug sobbing my sister's name, finally understanding that the crash meant for me had taken the one person in this family he actually loved. At the crash site, investigators spent hours combing through the wreckage before confirming catastrophic brake failure with no survivors, and it took several more days before forensics flagged the brake line itself as deliberately compromised rather than simply worn. At the morgue, the medical examiner pulled back a sheet to reveal a small gold necklace as the only recognizable item left, and as Marcus collapsed, sobbing over the remains, I leaned close and whispered that it was lucky I had asked to take the sedan that morning, watching the words land on him like a noose tightening around his throat. Moments later, the examiner delivered a second blow, revealing that Brielle had been 8 weeks pregnant, a detail that sent Diane crumbling to the floor in a scream that shattered whatever composure remained in that family. Over the following 2 weeks, detectives quietly built their case, pulling security footage from the dealership Marcus claimed had serviced the SUV, interviewing the technicians who insisted no such appointment had ever been logged, and slowly cross-referencing his financial records once I mentioned, carefully and without accusation, that Marcus had personally insisted his sister take that specific car despite my own hesitation that morning. Nothing about the process felt fast or clean. Every subpoena took days, every lab result took longer, and I spent those weeks playing the grieving wife in public, while quietly feeding Sterling every detail I could recall without ever appearing to push too hard. That night I called my father, Harrison, telling him the crash had not been an accident, that Marcus had cut my brakes and killed his own sister by mistake, and within days our family attorney, Sterling, had frozen every joint account and begun the slow, methodical work of tracing exactly where Marcus was trying to move our money before the walls closed in around him. Sterling called a week later with even worse news. Marcus was quietly liquidating funds and transferring a large stake in his construction firm into an LLC registered to a woman named Renee, the same mistress from the phone call confirming he intended to fund his secret family with money stolen from the wreckage of his own crime. I filed for an emergency freeze on every marital asset, then met my father at a quiet cafe to plan our next move before the funeral, the one place Marcus would be too distracted and too watched to notice the trap slowly closing around him. At the funeral, held under a heavy gray sky that matched the mood of everyone gathered, Diane arrived already unraveling, accusing me publicly of somehow being responsible. And when Marcus dragged her aside and clamped a hand over her mouth in front of stunned mourners and two plainclothes detectives standing quietly near the back, I quietly sent Diane the ultrasound photo I had secretly pulled from Marcus' laptop weeks earlier, labeled with Renee's name, along with a single message explaining that her son had traded Brielle's life for $250 million to fund his new heir. Diane read it in the family room, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone, and something in her broke completely in that moment. That evening, Marcus stormed home from a failed attempt to move his frozen funds, grabbing me by the collar and demanding to know why his accounts were locked, only for Diane to appear on the staircase and slap him across the face, shoving the ultrasound in front of him and screaming that he had sold his own sister for a bastard child. Cornered by the frozen assets, his mother's fury, and the slow tightening net of the investigation, Marcus finally snapped and screamed the truth out loud, that it was supposed to be me in that car, not Brielle, admitting everything while I quietly angled my phone behind a pillow, recording every word of his confession. Weeks later, once forensics confirmed the brake line had been deliberately crushed with bolt cutters and detectives had assembled a full financial and behavioral case against him, Marcus and I were brought in separately for formal questioning. He panicked and accused me of somehow knowing the brakes were faulty, insisting I had let his sister take the car to frame him. But the detectives already had his own insistence on the record from multiple witnesses at the house that morning, along with his mounting debts, his mistress, and his demand that I merge my inheritance into our joint accounts, giving them the exact motive and timeline they needed. Sensing an arrest was coming, Marcus broke into the safe one night, stuffed cash and jewelry into a duffel bag, and tried to flee the state with Diane in tow. But Sterling had already alerted our contact at the police department, and squad cars intercepted them at a secluded family cabin in the woods, tackling Marcus face down in the mud as stacks of bills scattered across the ground. In the interrogation room, Sterling played the dash cam footage of the brake line being cut alongside the recorded confession from that violent night in our living room, and Marcus dropped his head to the table in total defeat while Diane watched through the glass, her mind finally shattering into a quiet, hollow laughter as she called out for a daughter who would never answer again. The trial took several months given the scale of the financial evidence, and the jury ultimately convicted Marcus of attempted murder, manslaughter, and financial fraud, sentencing him to 20 years to life in a maximum security prison. The court awarded me the entirety of my inheritance along with the house and remaining marital assets as restitution once the divorce finalized, and I sold the mansion that had become my personal prison, moving into a bright penthouse in San Francisco with nothing but my cat and a plan to rebuild everything on my own terms. 3 years later, I sat in the corner office of the family investment firm I had built from the ground up, managing a small, carefully chosen portfolio of real estate holdings and philanthropic ventures. No longer the naive housewife who once trusted a stranger with her whole life, but a confident, formidable woman running an empire she had earned entirely on her own terms. When a cheap prison envelope arrived from Marcus, his first letter in 3 years, I thought for a moment about Brielle, about Diane living out her days in a psychiatric care facility, and about how easily this could have been my own name carved into a headstone instead of hers. Then I stood, walked to the shredder in the corner of my office without a second thought, and fed the unopened envelope through it, watching his apologies and excuses turn to meaningless confetti on the floor, before grabbing my sunglasses and driving off into the California sun toward a dinner date with a man who had spent 6 patient months earning a real chance to know me. The storm behind me finally, completely clearing for good. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it down, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because Revenge Tales has a lot more stories just like this one coming your way, and you do not want to miss what happens next.